Okay, so we've removed our tilt and our pan and our pitch access servos, and now what we're going to do is work on getting to the potentiometers, cleaning them, as well as replacing the clutches. So the good news is we only have a little bit of desoldering to do because we only have to desolder the pan access servo. So I'm going to go ahead and do that first. Move some of these things out of our way. Again, I really like the bench vise, things like this. And be careful if you are using a bench vise or any other way to hold your servos that, first of all, you don't want to crush them, and second of all, you don't want to tear up flexible connectors or any of that good stuff. So just like before, soldering tip repair or desoldering iron. And let's move that a little bit more into the center of view. Okay. And as little heat as possible for as little time as possible. Maybe I was a little too delicate on the vise, so I'll slide that guy up. Tighten just a smidge. Okay. And just like before, a bit of a delicate operation here, which is how to lift the flexi without tearing it. So in this case, because it's a much smaller work surface, I like to use my tweezers and get that glue up as much as I can. Now in this case I've lifted it, so I'll switch to the non-pointy tweezers so that I can actually get a little bit better grip. And I'm just going to heat and gently lift. See, not quite. There. A little bit more heat than I wanted to use, to be honest with you. There. So now, got that flexi out of the way. Soldering station off. Okay. So why do we have to unsolder this flexi? Because we need to get into the gearboxes, and so for the pitch and the pan axis, the amount of flex material that's here is too short to let us free up the potentiometer pad, but for the tilt axis, when we get in there, you'll see that there's enough excess in that loop to let us do it. So what do I do on these? First of all, take note of the home positions. These are going to be very important. So I pulled these from the dogs roughly in their home positions. What does that mean? So in the pitch axis, or the tilt axis, I'm sorry, what you see is we're at a 90-degree angle. We're basically at 9 o'clock relative to the flexible connector, and 6 o'clock for the pan axis. And then this one's harder to see. This is our pitch axis, but the nylon bit has a flat edge and a rounded edge. And the rounded edge, the home position, is at, I guess, 6 o'clock, keeping with the same math that I've been using. But it's relative always to the flat edge of the potentiometer. So then what we do is we just go ahead and pry the nylon bits off. Thumbnail works fine for that. And if it helps, you can set them down in their home positions. What you're going to see is when we get into the potentiometer, they each have a home position. There's a pie-shaped wedge of the nylon wiper assembly that for all three potentiometers, or for all three servos rather, is going to be in the same position when we reassemble. So here goes some of the tricky part. There's various techniques to do this, but basically what we're going to need to do is take this black motor housing off of the gray, or sometimes their white part. There's 3 tabs, 1, 2, 3, and we need to do this without actually cutting the flexi or doing any damage. I like to take a sharp knife and be very careful, try to get it in between, and gently pry up. And if that doesn't work, I've got a small screwdriver. And it's a little harder for me because I normally have a magnifying lens in front of my eyes. But for the benefit of the filming, I don't have it. So all I'm really trying to do is get under that lip edge, which you may or may not be able to see. So having less than stellar success with tool A, I'll go to tool B, which is a very thin blade screwdriver. I'm going to try that same operation again. And the idea is not to tear this thing up too badly. Now I can come in from this side, but I risk damaging the pot. But in this case, I'm going to go ahead and do it because he's being very uncooperative. Tool A again. And it stands to reason that these were created with no user serviceable parts inside, according to Sony. So there, I got one of them up, and now I always try to just thumbnail the rest of it if I can. Remember, all the while, that tail on this thing, which is the plexi, no rips, no tears, very gentle. Usually after the first one, the second, third are more cooperative. Ironically, I pushed number one back on, so. Let's go for number three. And I can tell you from experience, sometimes these just come right off, and other times, hours. Well, since we've got that back one up, let's try the thumb again. Okay, that worked. And that worked. So maybe the right answer is to start with the back one. In any case, that now lifts off, and you can see that wiper assembly. And this is the pie-shaped wedge I was talking about, which sits between, let's call that the 6 o'clock and the 9 o'clock position, but what that means is that the wipers are effectively at 12 o'clock, and that's the home position. Now, how do we get this nylon brush assembly off, or the nylon wiper assembly off? You'll need to do that just to clean the potentiometer. So if you're not replacing clutches and you're just going in for cleaning, this is the same process. What I like to do is brace it on the bench. Do not pry on these brittle edges. I take one of my metal pries. You can use any number of tools, and using my tissue of my thumb as a brace, reaching under the edge of the nylon, but not digging into that black part of the potentiometer. And when you see these wipers, once they're disassembled, you'll understand, not trying to damage those guys. I'm just going to pry up ever so gently. And then once I get to a point where I'm happy, try with the thumb, but no. Again, I'm using my flesh on my thumb to brace, not the edge of the plastic of the servo housing, because it will crack. Slow and steady at this point. And again, just for the video, I picked a servo that's really uncooperative. There we go. And again, resolution of the camera is not the best, but 3 very delicate wipers trying to bend those. Set those guys aside. There's your potentiometer, and what we would do if we were just doing the cleaning is we would take some contact cleaner, spray it in a little cup, try not to breathe it in, take a Q-tip, one of our other handy tools, and then wipe around the potentiometer, clean it up real well. Likewise, the edges of the brushes, cleans up real well. And you see what I did? I just snagged it with the Q-tip, which is fine because it'll go back together okay. But when we reassemble, we want to remove any residual Q-tip. But we are going to go into the clutch itself and replace the clutch. So what does that mean? That means that I have to, there's a tiny bit of glue that holds that potentiometer pad into the servo housing. And what I like to do is kind of a newer technique. I like to straighten that flexi. I'm trying to be very, again, gentle, don't want to break it. And I use my smooth jaw angle pliers, again, grabbing as close as I can. And now here's the hard part. I don't want to grab the flexi. I want to grab that potentiometer board, and I'm going to use my thumb and just pry a tiny bit. There's just the tiniest little glue, and I heard it snap. And I'm going to try to wiggle it by hand and see. What I used to do, and I can still do this, is I used to take a curved implement, put it flat against the bottom, use my thumb, and brace, and lift up. And see, that also works. Sometimes just depends on how much glue is on the back of the potentiometer pad, and then we set that guy aside. Next, you'll have to remove the, well, you don't have to remove this next, but I like to remove it next. There's a C-clip. Where this handy Nipex tool comes in. It's for putting on and taking off these C-clips. Put it in there, squeeze it, opens outward, and then we can lift that clip off relatively easily. Set that guy aside as well. And now we need to pull the entire clutch assembly and the plastic bushing. There is a washer on top of here. I don't usually remove it, but be careful not to damage it. We need to pull that whole thing out. Now sometimes you can just rock it, but my friend Bruce taught me a trick that I like. In my case, I'm using the entire drill. Being careful not to actually use the drill, but I just want to use the chuck because it's a handy way to grab onto something circular, get a really good grip on it, and then be able to gently wiggle and pull the rest of it. Now, Bruce in his setup has a, and again, see, I made a point to pick the hardest servo I've ever worked on there for this demonstration. He's got a chuck that comes from one of his tool and die machines, which is quite nice because he just puts it on the bench, but in our case, the drill will work. So now what does one of the servos look like disassembled? Take it apart, and this is where I'll take the bushing off, make sure that I have the washer, set that aside, and you'll see the planetary gear mechanism that forms the base of it. Now, you might be tempted to turn this servo upside down and bang on it. I don't like to do that, but there are a couple of gears in here that I want to get out. But if you bang on it, sometimes the gears that are attached to the servo itself come off, and that's undesirable. But what I like to get out are these three little guys. One of them is going to stick. We've got that bit of the assembly, these three bigger guys. I don't know what their technical names are. And there's the factory clutch. Now, why do the factory clutches fail? You won't see it so good on the video. I'll maybe put some stills in later. But basically, there's a plastic ring in between this metal base and this metal shaft, and that plastic ring is what forms the slip clutch, and it slips and gives out. No bueno. We'll set that guy aside. Take one of our unibody clutch replacements from aiboclinic. Shameless plug. And this is how I like to reassemble. I like to go ahead and put the bushing on because the C-clip is really a nightmare. And so your luck may vary or will vary, your mileage may vary, but I find it best to just go ahead and set the bushing on there. Now the washer is still in the bushing. That's that slightly silvery bit. Take my Nipex ring tool, got the ring on there, and sorry you won't be able to see this very well, but ideally open it up, slide straight down. Now in this case, I only got the back edge to clip, which is fine. What I'm going to try to do is persuade the rest of it to clip down by pushing down and away from the shaft. And you really want to make sure that thing is down. There's a tiny little groove in the clutch, and if you got it all right, that bushing is going to spin free and not come out and give you a little bit of wiggle room. So it looks like we have a winner here. Okay, reassemble, opposite procedure. 3 large gears go on. It can only go on one way. There's a big end and a little end. This pinion goes on. Little gears go on the back of that. Now, there is, and I guess I'll take it apart to show you because sometimes it's just easier. By the way, in looking at it, I saw a piece of fuzz. We don't want a piece of fuzz in there. I remove that. If those gears or nylon gears are dirty, throw them in a little bit of, I like to use like 90% or better rubbing alcohol to clean them up. You can use a toothbrush. Inside the servo, there's another plastic gear that sits down on top of the metal drive gears from the servo itself. And I find reassembly to be a little bit easier if I pull that out because it meshes better. So I'm going to reach in and grab that guy, and that way you'll be able to see him too. Okay, so that's what he looks like. And I will put him on the stack, and then here's the trick to reassembly, a couple tricks actually. First of all, there's a notch in the bushing. Again, you may not be able to see it, but it's right here. That notch in the bushing lines up with the center of the notch where the potentiometer comes through. And so what I like to do is hold it so I'm looking at that notch, take the servo, and hold it upside down like this, because guess what? If I turn it right side up, all the gears are going to fall off. And then slide that servo, and I just nicked it on the way down so it jumped, so I have to redo it. Probably not good to have a lot of coffee before you do this. And then that bushing is going to slide all the way in. And I'm actually using my thumbnail in that slot to sort of guide it. And it should snap. And when it snaps, you should feel a wiggle in the servo. And that means that that's not all compacted. And here's the high-tech test equipment that I've rigged up for this purpose, a 1.5 volt battery. Before you do anything else, you're going to want to make sure that the servo spins freely in both directions under power. So my friend Bruce has a nice little test rig for this, but I do not. If you can hear that, nice slow, smooth sounding groan, I don't say grind, and then reverse polarity, backwards, same thing. And I'll test this again after we've completely reassembled it, but the key is to test it now, because if you reassemble it and you've got those gears bound, you're going to have to take the whole thing apart again. All right, so what does the rest of the reassembly look like? Flip over the potentiometer pad, check it. If there's a lot of thick glue here, take your flat knife blade against the desk and gently clean that, word of the day. If it's clean like this one is, because we had a nice clean break, and we'll show you where the blue tape is your friend again. I like to use that as a work area for a nice big drop of super glue. And all I'm going to do is use a toothpick to apply 3 small drops. And by small, I mean you can barely see them at, let's say, the 12 o'clock and the 7 or 8 o'clock position and the 4 to 5 position. Too much super glue will ruin your servo. So I'm literally going to put it right up near the edge, but not so close to the edge where it's going to leach around and onto that potentiometer pad. If you get super glue on the front of this thing, it's basically trash. It's nice to have acetone nearby or nail polish remover so that if it does happen, you can hopefully recover. Turn that guy over and we insert him, and then take a different toothpick or the back of your toothpick and push down where the glue spots are. You want to make sure that's level. Be very careful, and the reason I'm using the back of this toothpick that's a rounded edge back is I don't want to mar that resistive surface on the potentiometer pad, or again, I've ruined it. So that's what we do for reassembly on this guy. Meanwhile, I'm going to go ahead and work on the other three to get them to this point, and then we can show the complete reassembly. You know what I will do? Let me switch over to the tilt axis, and I can show you how we can work it without desoldering. Should we try our new technique of starting with the one in the middle first? We've got 3 tabs on the black piece of the motor housing. Okay, move the back one first, and let's see if we can lift up and get the others to cooperate. Okay, not as cooperative as our other one. Okay, if I get 2 out of 3, usually the third one will come off by the fingernail. There we go. Okay, so why did I want to show you this? Let's go ahead and get the wiper off. I may be able to show you multiple things today. Yes, I will. Well, what I was going to show you is the removal of the wiper and then just being able to lift up and pull the potentiometer. But double bonus point score today, what we're finding is that that nylon for the wiper assembly is so tight on the shaft. Watch what's going to happen. The entire servo is going to deconstruct. So, and that's just because there wasn't any glue really binding the bushing into the servo, and that happens from time to time. So what I'll do, show you how we remediate this. Again, I like to pull out the planetary gears now, because if I don't, then I may lose them. You're probably best to set them in a very safe place so they don't go flying. Trust me, they do go flying. Here's where the bench vise comes in handy. So I've had this take 3 different attempts with the bench vise. The first attempt of what I'm going to do is, because I still need to get the nylon wiper assembly off first, and I know I'm throwing away this clutch, so what I'm going to do is I took the protective rubber off of the bench vise, and I'm going to clamp the body of the clutch, because again, I don't need this clutch. Clamp that in there good. Get something that is about going to give me the height that I need as a lever or fulcrum, and then use my lever, or if you say lever, pull up. And now what we're finding is the clutch is so destroyed that it's actually separating. This is why I say sometimes this is multiple operations. So now dump the clutch base, and I'm going to have to clamp on the bench vise the actual base of the slip clutch shaft, but because I know from experience that the plastic is just going to pull out next, I'm going to save myself that step and pry the plastic slip clutch ring off. Maybe we'll take some stills of him later. And now, just like before, reclamp now the base of that clutch shaft. Okay. And again, make a fulcrum because I don't want to be damaging that potentiometer pad. And now you can see, hopefully, wiper assembly comes up. So again, this dog has proven to be instructive in many ways of how not to do this. At this point, we still need a little bit of leverage to, here I can go ahead and to break the glue that's holding the bushing on there. So I can do it while it's on bench clamped like this, or I could go back to the other way. This time I'm just going to try to gently lift up. And you know what, I don't like how that's feeling, so I'm not going to do it that way. So I do not want to harm that flexi. Plan B. Good old knife. And all I'm going to do is try to get it in between that wafer and the bushing. Again, flexi is the most valuable thing, and the potentiometer pad. Good news is, this guy's being equally uncooperative, so try the old-fashioned way. A little leverage. There we go. So all I did was I held the wafer, the potentiometer pad, and just rocked it a little bit, and that gave free. And for those of you, don't forget, there's that washer. We need that guy. Don't forget about the C-clip. Need that guy. Bushing, need that guy. But I don't know how well the camera's going to pick this up, but that's what a blown up clutch looks like. It's that black plastic slip ring that gets deformed over time and allows that clutch to slip. See, I can turn that freehand, and I should not be able to do that. Okay, so on that note, we'll probably speed up through the rest of this so you don't have to see it, and I will get back when we're reassembled. Okay, so here's a good example of a bad example. That didn't work. So feels like there's enough play in there, but it just means the gears aren't mated up, presumably. We're going to take that gearbox back apart. And then just to be sure, run that servo with no gearbox. Okay, it's running. So that means my reassembly didn't go well. Come on, 7. Much better. And now you see the value of the inexpensive high-tech test equipment. Okay, so glue is probably set on our first servo by now. This is where we'll resume what would I be doing if I was just cleaning potentiometers. I'd be inhaling quite a bit of contact cleaner. So I spray it in a little cup, it evaporates quickly. If I had a little lid for my little cup, I'd cover it up, but I don't. And then we're just going to take that Q-tip, go around all that resistive material. You may not be able to see that, but there's some green and black. That's corrosion. And likewise, tips of that wiper. Take a look, make sure you don't have any debris in there, which I did. I Q-tip lint, because that's just going to make your life hard later. Okay. And then reassembling the wiper. Again, you want those metal contacts relative to, if the potentiometer traces are 6, then that's 12 o'clock. Pi wedge kind of sits between 6 and 9. The challenge is when you push down on this guy, those wipers are going to flatten. So you actually need to be a little bit, just smidge, till maybe 11 and a half. And then the other thing is, these clutches have a spline cut all the way around them, and the vinyl has some notches where the original splines were, so you do well to sort of nestle that in place and try to find that natural position. And once you do, using your thumb, push down all the way, trying not to push too far. Here's the wrinkle: if you push too far, you'll jam the shaft of the servo itself, and then the servo will become inoperable. The other thing I like to do is bend those wipers forward a little bit before I reassemble. I didn't on this one, but what I'm going to do is check it with my ohm meter to see if I've got good contact. So this is not a lot of fun to watch, I'm sure, on the video, but what I'm going to do is read the 3 traces that come off of potentiometer and see what resistance I'm getting from center to left and center to right. See if they're about equal. 2.7 plus or minus k ohms on that direction. 2.86, doesn't get any better than that, and it tells me that I'm making full contact with those wipers, so I'm in good shape. So there's the home position. Pie-shaped wedge sits between 6 and 9. Wipers sit pretty close to the 2, if not at 12 o'clock. Resistance should be equal on both sides at that point, because that's the home position. Don't forget to put the motor shroud back on, and then, as we talked about earlier, the rounded edge for the pitch axis points to the home position. And there we have it. So, and out of an abundance of caution, if we want to try before we reinstall this in the dog, I can throw a little power on it, make sure it still moves, and it does. And am I worried that I just moved that out of the home position? No, because I put the nylon on at the correct position, so now I can actually spin that and servo, don't care. Not too far though, because if you spin it with power, you can actually spin it through that 6 o'clock position, which it was never intended to do, and we don't want to do that. Okay, so we'll go ahead and clean up the rest of our guys. Fortunately, not all of our contact cleaner has evaporated just yet. More Derbis. And I am going to, on this guy, off camera, maybe, I'm just going to ever so gently bias down those wipers a tiny bit. I'm not trying to deform them, I just want to make sure that when I reassemble, that these are making good contact. Make sure there's no debris. Try to find that sweet spot on the wiper for the spline. Like that. Now see, that guy's not wanting to go on, so what that tells me is I'm probably in an unnatural position on the spline. And now that I'm lifting up, the entire servo is going to want to come apart because my glue was so small. So what I'm going to do, the whole bushing came up. Oh, that happens. Here's the good news. We don't have to glue the bushing in, but now that I've done this, I'm going to have to reseat the bushing and retest servo. Feels like it's in a good spot. Let me put some power on it just to make sure. Now, I'll wait because then I'll disrupt the home position. So this time we're just going to turn it over, hope for the best. Give it a push, and that looks good. I can tell though I need a little bit more, so I'm going to go to the hard disk surface. There. I want to be banging on these things because if you, again, bang on them, there's a really delicate assembly down here in the servo base that once that guy gets crushed, can't be uncrushed. Ask me how I know. See, like that. Okay, so we'll pause on this one because I need to do a little restorative work. Okay, good news, folks watching at home. I didn't crush and kill the servo. I just had to unpack and repack the gearbox. So back to where we were finishing. I did apply power. It is running. And remember that home position for this guy was at 12 o'clock. And just for fun, let's go ahead and check. See how close I got on those wipers to the 0 position, which remember, we're going to look for equal resistance on both sides, 3 kilo ohms that way, 2.7, a little bit less, won't be a problem. Okay, we've got one more to clean and reassemble. Okay, and the home position for this guy, remember he sits in the dog's head this way and servo goes that way. So there you have it. There's our tilt, our pan, and our pitch axis. Servo is reassembled. We will need to resolder both, but I always do the pitch axis once it's been put through the motor block, so I guess I'll do that for you here now too. Set that aside for a moment, grab our motor block. This process is the reverse of what we did before, so remember we left our tape on to keep that connector from getting crushed. There's a notch here where the potentiometer is going to stick out, so that's where it's naturally going to end up, so I just kind of like to feed the flexi through to get it started in the right orientation, and then lay that flexi flat, hold it with your thumb, kind of get it to the point where You can hold that flexi down as you gently slide it back through. You may have to feed from this end. This one's going in quite nicely. And then when you get all the way to the end, I like to kind of gently tug as I'm pushing down that last bit. And now, take off our tape. And so you see we've completely protected that flexi from stress for the most part during the process. If you're lucky, there will still be some adhesive on the back of that flexi. I'm still looking for a good light liquid or spray adhesive that we can use to put these back together. I kind of just tamp it down with my fingernails. So see, in this case, I'm not as lucky, so I'll end up taping that one. Get him up here and stable. And in this case, I'm going to set that nylon down along part of the vise. And the reason for that is, you can't see it here, but the reason for that is when I go to solder, this guy's going to want to push out. We don't want that. So that will keep him from pushing out. I'm going to use a little bit of tape on this other edge of the motor block just to hold that in place while I solder. Sometimes if you take a splooging tool, you can burnish it down a little bit, but it feels like that adhesive is pretty much toast. So, yeah. Not going to cooperate. That's okay. Remember, there's always plan A, plan B, and plan C. Soldering iron hot. Tin the tip if you need to. Here we like to put a little bit of solder on the tip. And yep, I know blowing on it seems kind of silly, but we really don't want to melt those flexis if we don't need to. So that's number one. And the other guy that we had to unsolder here, same idea. What I like to do on this is clamp that flexi to the edge of the servo, which you see once my hand's out of the way. Oh, I didn't line it up very well. There we go. I see this one's a little bit more cooperative. Still a little bit of adhesive left. Oh, spoke too soon. So I say I think I can get it done, but that's why I like the blue tape. Useful on so many occasions. Yeah, spoke too soon, right? Try not to cut your soldering cable on the back of your chair. Not quite. Not one, not two, but three. 3 puffs of breath is exactly what you need. Okay, so now we will be ready to reassemble.